If I can have your attention, welcome to the next panel, and this is on Objectivism in India. And this is something I was very interested in when we were trying to find who we were going to have speak this year, and I saw that Jerry was interested. I thought this is great because something I've been writing about actually for a while is India and Objectivism. If you do, at least this was a couple of years ago, and I looked at it. If you do a Google Trends search, it tells you where the most inquiries are coming from for certain search terms. Interestingly enough, most sex terms, the most inquiries are coming from the Middle East. Go figure. But anyway, the interesting thing is if you do Atlas Shrugged, Ayn Rand, I think the Fountainhead, usually number 1 or 2 is coming from India. And usually the United States is number 1 or 2, and they'll sometimes switch back and forth, and Atlas will be the number 1 place from which those searches are coming from would be India. And there's a lot of other indications that we'll hear in this talk. But anyway, that's why this is a fascinating topic. Wouldn't it be great to have another country interested in objectivism and Ayn Rand and the principles, and a country that's the biggest democracy in the world, to the extent it's a democracy.
So we like to claim.
But anyway. That's right. Anyway, Jerry Johnson is a corporate communications professional with academic training in psychology and philosophy. He is also a TED speaker and lecturer. TEDx speaker and curator. His articles have appeared in the Times of India, DNA, Open Magazine. Jerry has been active in spreading the ideas of objectivism in India through his collaboration with think tanks in India. You probably know some of the same folks that I
Perhaps,
do.
Yeah.
Pasha. And,
right. Baron Mitra.
Yeah, and Baron Mitra. They've got some really good people over there. And with philosophy groups at the University of Mumbai. Can I still use Bombay? I don't know.
Yes, we do
I
all
use
the
Bombay.
time. Yes.
And through his soon-to-be-launched institute, the Delphi Center, which I'm very interested in. So anyway, without further ado, we're going to hear from Jerry, and then we'll have some time at the end for questions. So take it away.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ed. Well, so let me start by saying I'm absolutely honored to be here with the kind of company that I'm seeing around myself. There are a lot of very brilliant, very accomplished people, so I'm honored. So having said that, so my goal here is really not to explore objectivism and kind of discover some new insights and present that to you. That's not the goal of this talk. I'm here to just kind of see if there are parallels in the way in which Indians would understand objectivism or some of the ideas that objectivism has, and try and draw lessons into how we can communicate objectivist ideas to non-Western cultures. So going through the Indian example. Okay. So let me start by saying, why is this topic relevant to you, right? And then I think Ed actually just kind of alluded to a lot of the points. India ranks after America and Canada in online English language searches for Randian topics, and this was by The Economist in October 2012. Okay. So historically, post-independence, when Jawaharlal Nehru imposed his version of socialism on India, almost everyone who could fled the country, and they left to go for much freer societies like America and many countries in Europe. But then in 1991, when India underwent economic liberalization to some extent, Indians were tremendously optimistic and eager about the oncoming economic changes. And so what happened was that even communist parties of India that were typically official political parties that would compete in Indian elections began getting wiped out post the liberalization that happened in 1991. And as it turns out, Ayn Rand currently outsells Karl Marx in India 16-1, despite the fact that there isn't any official libertarian party or any kind of an objectivist party in India. So that's an interesting kind of phenomena that requires some kind of an explanation. And so over the years, what has happened is there's been a sharp tilt towards the economic right in anticipation of greater economic freedoms, and even if it came at the cost of social and cultural freedoms. Now, that is evidenced by the most overwhelming mandate that we've received in post-independence India to the right-wing BJP party, which is the right-wing Hindu fundamentalist party. And that's Narendra Modi, who's now the current Prime Minister of India. So he came from this right-wing fundamentalist Hindu party with a very large mandate to rule the country. And I think a lot of the phenomena can be explained by the fact that Indians are so eager to get economic reforms, and they're willing to kind of compromise, therefore, on more social and cultural freedoms. So what does it all mean? Okay, so here's another interesting article in Foreign Policy by Jennifer Burns. Some of you may know Jennifer Burns was also the author of the latest biography on Ayn Rand. I think it was called Goddess of the Market. She, in fact, wrote about this phenomenon in India where there are lots of people who are completely attracted to Ayn Rand's ideas. But then she claims that Ayn Rand's ideas will not seep down further into a culture because of a certain discomfort between the ideas of capitalism and objectivism and, say, like self-interest and egoism with some traditional Indian ideas. So she claims that there is a fundamental disconnect, and therefore Ayn Rand's ideas will not seep down culturally very much into the country. And I actually somehow tend to disagree on that, and that's essentially the core of my thesis. I will argue that this is not an ideological unease between Indian culture and objectivism, and I will actually argue that India is, after all, a country that worships wealth. And if you see this is a very famous image of the goddess Laxmi. Goddess Laxmi represents wealth in India, and there are massive and elaborate rituals around celebrating money and wealth, and in the respect of those traders who earn money and merchants who make money. So I'm going to talk about how a country of 500 million people worshipping money would find it uncomfortable to accept capitalist ideas. Right? Okay, so historically, if you also look at it, Indians have accorded a lot of respect to the merchant class. Now, many of you, when you think about India, you must have heard of the caste system. Right? Now, in the caste system, there's this social hierarchy where we have the Brahmin class at the top of the hierarchy, and very soon below, we have the warriors and the traders. Now, the trader class, which is the merchant class, are known as the twice born. Some of you may be familiar with the term born again. So here we have a social status accorded to merchants and traders as the twice born of India, which means that level of respect. So how do we have a country that worships money, has a goddess of wealth, respects merchants and traders as a twice born, and yet then slips into socialism, and then the world believes that there are some inherent contradictions between India and Indian culture and the ideas of Ayn Rand? I'm actually going to give you some more examples. We have television channel very unashamedly called NDTV Profit. We have another channel called Money Mantra. Okay, that Hindi word there is mantra. So we're very unashamed about the fact that, money is a very big part of our lives. So I strongly suspect that the problem is not with Rand's ideas being too alien to India, to our culture, but I think rather it lies in the way in which these ideas are communicated. And I think that's where some lessons can be learned, right? Now, here's just a personal anecdote, actually. Before the recent parliamentary elections in India, I was engaged in a 45-minute-long conversation with one of the parliamentarians who was running for election. And, they had just released a manifesto, and so I was, discussing all the various contradictions and the implications of his manifesto, his party's manifesto. And then he stopped me midway, and he's like, wait, are you talking about laissez-faire capitalism, dog-eat-dog world? And I just told him, I said, forget about the label. Just concentrate on what I'm talking about. What are the implications of your certain ideas? I don't care if you call it laissez-faire. I don't care if you call it capitalism. I don't care if you just call it benevolent trade and exchange. Whatever you want to call it, that's irrelevant. But let's explore some of the implications of what you are suggesting. And so I think that's where the key lies in. These kinds of communication, the terms we use, which sounds foreign to India, laissez-faire. It's a French word appropriated into English, and now we're trying to sell it to Indians, So I'm a communication professional. Professionally, that's what I do. So I get paid for, communicating. And then I'm also an Indian, right? So I share that kind of psychological ease with some of the ideas that circulate within the culture. And also I'm an objectivist. I studied and learned objectivism in the American context. So I did my schooling here, and I studied objectivism here while I was living in America for 8 years. So I've got this American context of objectivism. I've got the Indian context of the ideas and the history of it. and then I'm a communication professional. So I'm going to just bring all of that together into this talk, okay? So I'm actually going to begin by talking about some of the dominant myths of India, and for that I heavily rely on the works of this very famous author, Devdutt Patnaik. He's the author of more than 25 books on Indian mythology, and what he does is very brilliant. He combines Indian mythology to extract business and leadership lessons. So he's actually a consultant, a culture consultant to some of the biggest corporations in the world, including Bill Gates, including Bill Clinton. When he had come to India, he had visited Devdutt Patnaik, and some of our major political parties in India, some of our major corporations. So he's a very influential figure in India, and he's also a very acknowledged authority on Indian culture and mythology. So I rely greatly on his works. That is not to say that he in any way endorses some of the ideas that I'm going to be talking about. In fact, it would be reasonable to assume that he functions in a field that's completely opposed to objectivism, so no endorsement from his side. However, he's been generously supportive of my project. He's given me a lot of his time and his advice in helping me develop this. So we'll begin right away. Okay. So the metaphysics. Okay, we'll begin with the metaphysical worldview. Now, in order to understand Indians, it will be useful to understand the subconscious concepts that many Indians are influenced by. And now these are very broad generalizations, but they can be very useful in exploring motivations and our beliefs and some of our behaviors. A lot of this might be a little too complex, so feel free to keep your questions in mind for the Q&A later, okay? Because a lot of this will be completely foreign, for good reason, okay? Now, metaphysically, one of the most recurring and dominant themes in Indian mythology is the idea of karma. And this is related to the idea of rebirth. Okay, the idea of rebirth is this exclusively unique Indian concept that was then exported through Buddhism and Jainism into the far Southeast Asia, into China and Sri Lanka. And it's an Indian philosophical thought that tends towards infinity. It says that all of reality and all of existence is infinite, or it's also known as Sanatan. Sanatan means timelessness. Time does not apply to existence. And so the constant movement through birth and rebirth is essentially the journey of life. And the hope is that as you're going around through these several cyclical births and rebirths, you are also growing in wisdom over time. And then, eventually attaining nirvana and, getting subsumed with the all-cosmic being. So while in the West, the template in the West is one life, one world, one goal, and therefore, driven towards it, the Indian context is many lives, many worlds, and therefore many opportunities, therefore many perspectives, and therefore many realities. So subjectivity, this idea that my reality and my world also can coexist with your reality and your world, is a very strong part of the Indian culture, of the Indian psyche, right? Interestingly enough, subjectivity is also recognized very strongly by objectivism. You would have to acknowledge that each one of us has our own different perspective on the way we look at the external world. So you will have objectivism that will have to incorporate or include subjectivity as part of it. So for instance, when you look at the subjective psyche of the Western mind, which tends towards one life, you will see this need for permanence. Okay, look at your tombstones, look at the giant Egyptian pyramids, which are all intended to say that I lived here. Okay, it is to mark your space in this world, to say that this is my life, and I've done it, and I've lived here. But look at the Indian way. Many lives, transience. So you cremate, you burn the bodies so that they become nothing. They turn to dust, and then you take the ashes and you put them into the river. And again, the river signifying fluidity, movement. So there is no permanence. You will not, you can't go back to that spot where you burned the body and say, okay, well this is where so-and-so lie. So look at the way in which we mark our lives in this world. So the subjective beliefs of people in many cultures tend to believe that nothing is permanent, not even death. Hence, you have this kind of an approach to the death. So it's all an unending cycle of events. And so I'll get into a story about how this works. On the left, you have Alexander the Great, coming to India as he was busy conquering the world. And on the way, he met a naked monk. And the naked monk was sitting on a piece of rock. And most likely, the naked monk must have been a Jain monk, because Jain monks tend to walk around naked. Okay? They are known as the sky-clad. They're clad with the sky. So they're known as the Digambar Jains. So Alexander went up to him and asked him, what are you doing with your life? Okay? And the naked monk said, well, I'm sitting and I'm observing the stars in the sky. And then the monk asked Alexander, what are you doing with your life? And Alexander said, I am out to conquer the world. And both laughed. Both laughed at the foolishness of the other. Alexander said, oh, you're just wasting your life away. This is all you have, and this is what you're doing. And the monk looked at him and said, no matter how far you go and how far you travel, you will have to come back again here. So we are all going to be traveling again and again and again. So what's the point? We're still moving, right? So both of them had different frameworks and different stories to look at how you look at life, and therefore achievement, and therefore goals. If you only have one life, you will be urgency-oriented. You will be goal-driven. You will be achievement-focused. You will have milestones. And therefore, success for you will be measured by these milestones. So success in one life will be measurable. But then if you look at many lives, you will have contemplation, introspection. The job will be to discover the meaning of it all. Why are we here? There is a risk of complacency. But then you will always ask why. So it's this unending cycle. And see, Alexander says, that's my goal. And the monk says, you are not looking far enough. Right? So that's the psyche there. So here's the epistemological question. The American would say, just do it. And the Indian would say, but why? Right? Now, why, interestingly, comes from this Sanskrit root word called ka. And ka is the root word for all questions in Hindi. Kya, kyun, kab, kahan. Ka, incidentally, also happens to be the earliest name given to a god in Hinduism. Ka is also the root word for karma. So let's just join all of these dots and think. So we begin to realize, okay, that asking the question in Indian mythology, what, where, how, why, is incredibly important. And you will see that the driving force of rebirth and the cycle, which is karma, is intricately tied to God and to questioning. Right? So you begin to connect the dots and you say that, okay, so seeking understanding, growing in wisdom, perhaps might be the purpose of life. So perhaps that's what we're supposed to do. So we're supposed to grow and expand in the most unique of human capacities, which is our capacity to think. Okay? So karma now essentially means that there will be consequences to every action, now which you are obligated to experience. Everything that happens to us is a reaction to an action that we have committed. Now these reactions and actions are not judged as good or bad, evil or moral or good. Hinduism or Indian cultures in general do not have any direct translation for the word evil. So no matter how much you try and you get synonyms of the word evil in Hindi, you will not get an exact translation. Which is an interesting point, because when you look at karma and when you look at the many lives culture, how can anything be considered evil? Because then you are being so short-sighted. You're saying that in this lifetime, in this context, it's evil. But then sometimes if you're looking at such a huge gaze into the future of many lives, some of your evil actions today might turn out to have some excellent consequences in tomorrow and in future lifetimes. So how is that connected to what we're talking about? It means that you cannot escape responsibility. So in Indian culture, karma means responsibility lies squarely in your lap, which also then means that context is paramount before you rush into judgment, which means you have to know that before you consider this evil and good, do you have enough context? Have you been gazing far enough? Right? So then that brings us to the next idea, the idea of the divinity within and without in Indian thought. So this illustration very beautifully shows that the more I see farther, the more I will be able to see into myself. Okay? So it's called darshan. Darshan is also this phenomena where you go into a temple and you look at the god, the idol, and the idol looks back at you, and you discover more of yourself. So darshan is a word used typically when people go to the temple. So then you see, there is this concept that the more you see further apart, the more you're able to see into the context of another human being, the more you're able to see into their subjective reality, to be able to see where they're coming from and how are they perceiving the world or how are they perceiving you, you will be able to see where you fail, your limitations in your frameworks, your worldviews that may not actually translate into their worldview. And so we have this phrase called aham brahmasmi tattvam asi, which means I am the divine and so are you. Okay, so to put it in more familiar phrases, every man is an end in himself and not a means to the end of others. Okay, so that's a more familiar phrase that we are familiar with. But then when you're speaking to an Indian, they get this quickly. Aham brahmasmi, you are a divinity and so am I. We are not sacrificial beings, means to each other's ends. But then which gets us to this other concept of who are we? Okay, so the self, the concept of the self in Indian thought. Now in Indian mythic stories, there is a differentiation between I am and I have. The I am is transient, okay? And what I have tends to be something that's immortal, something that outlives us. So for example, relationships, reputation, property can outlive you. You will die, but the relationships that you forged, the emotional connections that you made, and some of the property that you had will outlive you. So our self-image is comprised of who I am and what I have. Now, in the Ramayana, which is one of the big scriptures of Hinduism, there is the god king called Ram. Okay. Now, Ram is not defined by what he has. Ram is very secure in who he is. And this is established by the fact that Ram, being the god king, is very comfortable with giving up his kingdom and moving off into exile in the forest for like tens of years. And he has no qualms about it. There is no battle, there's no war to reclaim his kingdom. He goes off into the exile, fully secure in his status of who he is. Now, in contrast, in the same story, we have the villain, the bad guy. We have Ravan. He is also a king, but he measures himself by what he has. Okay? So, as a result, even though he's a king, he steals another man's kingdom. He steals another man's wife. Incidentally, he steals Ram's wife. And he wants everything that others have. Because he believes that what he has needs to be enlarged and enlarged in order to contribute to what he is. So then you have these different selves. How nature sees you, the physical body, how you see yourself, which is your own mental image, and then how society sees you, the social body. So what should you be most focused on? That's the key question, right? And to draw parallels with familiar stories, stories familiar to us, we have Howard Roark, who knows the difference between who I am and what he has. And then we have Peter Keating, who believes that what he is a huge part of what he has or what he can acquire. And so then he marries Dominique Franken, thinking that that will give him some credibility, what he has. He's trying to build on that. And you have Howard Roark, who has no job and he has no contracts, but he's still completely secure. He's like the god king Ram, secure in having to lose his kingdom, but knowing who he is. So what is the root of all of these insecurities that, like, say, a person like Peter Keating would have? And so we'll get into the root of insecurities and how that manifests into behavior. So here I draw this contrast between Howard Roark or Ram and Peter Keating and Ravan. You have Ram, who is secure, self-directed, poor but content, and he establishes meaningful relationships, and he has a strong self-image. So that middle circle, the what I am circle is strong and it's large. And you have Peter Keating or Ravan, who's an insecure god. If you notice the iconography, Ravan has 10 heads, which means he's got so much wisdom. So the 10 heads is symbolic for how much he knows, the wisdom and the knowledge that he's attained. So he's got so much knowledge, he's attained a lot of wisdom, he's got 10 heads, and yet he's insecure. He's other-directed, always wanting that man's wife, that man's kingdom. He's rich, but he's still discontent, constantly pursuing something. He has meaningless relationships, and he's focused on the social image, not the self-image. So then we go into human fears. Why are there certain people like Peter Keating? Why do we have certain people like Howard Roark? Human fears, we could largely say fear of scarcity or hunger, fear of danger or harm, fear of meaningless or invalidation. And to address these fears, Indian mythology will offer you these solutions. Bring in the three goddesses called Laxmi, Saraswati, and Durga. Now I'll get into what these goddesses stand for. Laxmi, look at the iconography here. She is, as I said in the beginning of the presentation, the goddess of wealth. She has a pot of gold, and she has lotus. A lotus flower that blooms and a pot of gold with unending wealth that comes out. So if you have the fear of hunger or scarcity, this is a goddess that will answer you. So you need to invoke goddess Laxmi. Then you have Saraswati. Saraswati holds a lute, and if you look at that arm in the corner over there, she holds some scrolls, some paper, some work. And it represents, so this goddess represents wisdom. Art, music, knowledge, growing in emotional wisdom, growing in intellectual wisdom. So you have Saraswati. And then you have Durga. Notice Durga carries a trident, and she's seated on a lion. So there's strong visual sense of warrior protection. So if you have the fear of danger or insecurity, Durga is the one to invoke. So now you have Laxmi, Saraswati, and Durga, the spiritual LSD that Hinduism offers you to overcome your fears. Now, interestingly, Hinduism also warns you about how you can approach these goddesses. In Indian thought, to chase Laxmi or to chase wealth is considered to be a bad omen, because there is a god called Indra who constantly is chasing Laxmi, chasing wealth. But Laxmi is constantly running away from Indra, going to another god called Vishnu. And Vishnu is seated calmly in repose. If you look at the iconography of Vishnu, he's seated horizontally with Laxmi at his feet, which means Hinduism warns you about chasing money for its own sake. Says, don't pursue wealth. Let wealth be attracted to you. But then how do you attract wealth? So Hinduism would say, here, so the state of fearlessness. So the contribution of happiness is wisdom, emotional security, and wealth. So Hinduism would say the pursuit of wealth has to be tempered by the pursuit of knowledge as well as emotional security. So unless you are not emotionally secure in yourself, unless you've not grown in wisdom about the bigger questions of this world, your pursuit of wealth will be riddled with a lot of strife, a lot of angst, a lot of fears. So you'll not be able to overgrow your fears if you're just pursuing wealth by its own sake. So in the Western vocabulary, you have the pursuit of happiness. But in the Indian mythology, it would be the attraction of happiness, the attraction of these goddesses towards you. You invoke the goddesses to you. You don't chase them. So here you go. So when you're looking at heroes in context, if you look at Ram and Roark engage with the world, but they don't chase money. And yet they achieve their purpose in life. So you have Saraswati, who tells you what your purpose in life can be through wisdom. You have Laxmi, who are not chased by Ram or Roark. Roark doesn't chase contracts for money. He chases contracts because that's what he wants to do. The way he wants to build is the way he will do it. And he engages with the world. He doesn't shy away from the world. He goes for those meetings and he attempts to make get these contracts fructify. So you have Ram in that context. But if you want another context, you have Shiva. And you will have John Galt as a similar kind of companion. Both of them withdraw from the world. Shiva is a god who sits in peace on top of a mountain of ice, stone, completely barren, aloof from the world, and he's known as the god that destroys. And then you have John Galt, who's also come to destroy the existing order, right? Both, again, don't chase Laxmi, right? So again, you have John Galt and many of the strikers in Galt's Gulch who've given up very lucrative jobs, very lucrative careers, and very big social statuses in order to go become shoe cobblers and become gardeners and farmers in Galt's Gulch. Both are self-secure, and both are content. So they both have Durga, goddess Durga, sitting with them. So again, coming back to happiness, it's the state of fearlessness where you've outgrown your human fears through wisdom, emotional security, and the pursuit of wealth. What that leads to then are two kinds of societies. Okay? So you could either have a Ranabhumi, which is a battlefield. In Indian mythology, you have the battlefield of Mahabharata, some of you may have heard, where you are chasing a kingdom, you're fighting for a kingdom, and then this is what results. You have bloodshed. Or you could have a place called Rangabhumi, which is a playground. So when you're trying to sell capitalism, how are you talking about it? Are you talking in terms of competition, competitiveness, dog eat dog, or are we talking about mutual trade, collaboration, getting together, playing in a playground on an equal field? So the description of being happy in a capitalist society for an Indian, something that would sound more comfortable with them, is one where you talk about emotional security, you talk about wisdom, and the pursuit of wealth, or rather the attraction or the invocation of wealth as a consequence or as part and parcel of this entire kind of journey that you're going through many lifetimes. So now look at the nature of politics, therefore, for Indians. In a Western formal dinner meal, you will have this centralized control in the way in which food is served to you. You know, the chef will serve you your starter, and you have to finish it first before you move to the next course. If you look at the order in which the plates are served, if you look at the order in which the cutlery is served, there's a very clear linearity because there's one life, there's one order, there's one way, right? One holy book, one God, one chef, right? So he decides the exact taste of the meal that you will have. So the chef will decide for everybody the same exact taste of this meal, and it will be controlled. But then you have the Indian way of eating. Everything together, at once. You decide how you want to eat. You can start with the starter, or you can start with the dessert. And you can end with the starter, or you can put it all at the same time in your mouth. And each one will discover a different flavor, a different taste. So there is that autonomous control. You decide, you're in control of your life. So then what are we achieving here? What is our final destination, our goal? Gall's Gulch, to live on your own terms, leave behind statuses of society, the social image, and fortunes. Have no sacrifice. Don't go for a battlefield. Do not go for Ranabhumi, where there's bloodshed. That's Gall's Gulch, right? And then you have a similar idea called Vishnu's Vaikuntha, the paradise of Vishnu, where again it is a happy playground. It is prosperity with peace, where hunger and fears are overgrown, and there is no sacrifice, and it is not a Ranabhumi, it is a Rangabhumi. So then I have to stand on one foot and talk about the similarities between Objectivism and Indian thought. And you have, in Indian thought, existence is real, and it's infinite. There is no beginning, there is no end. This must be accepted, and this must be understood. Epistemologically, question everything. There is wisdom in growing in all of the questions that you ask. And subjective context of each and every person is important to take into consideration as part of your own analysis of objective reality. Ethics, I am the divine and so are you. You are not the means to my ends. Politics, autonomous and organic control to create a playground, a Rangabhumi. And LSD, the emotional and intellectual wisdom with which wealth will follow. Thank you. Namaste.